Do I ever load knee flexor exercise with higher reps and hip hinge exercise with lower reps? Knee flexor exercise with high reps, not really, unless I'm doing like some type of more stabilization type knee flexor exercise, like a knee flexion on ball or something like that, where I'm just trying to build up reps as you're creating balance and stability at the core muscles. For the most part, if we're talking about leg curls, glute ham raise, Nordic eccentric and stuff like that, I like to keep the reps below 8, simply because the nature of the knee flexor tends to be more fast twitch. So to do higher reps would be a little counterproductive. There wouldn't be any use for that. When it comes to hip hinge, yes, you can go lower reps. There's no issue doing so. So I tend to use slightly higher reps because I use these exercises a little bit more towards the end of the session. But that being said, it doesn't mean that you couldn't do, for example, a Romanian deadlift for sets of 5. Like there's no issues doing that. But again, it just depends where you're using this exercise within the context of your training session when it comes to rep prescription. When, why, and how do I program training to failure? So when it comes to like standard strength training phases, I like to train to failure in the B and C series with the assistance and remedial exercises. At this point in time, you've done your quality work using step loading or whatever it might be with your A series. So now the B series, where you have left sets to account for and lower average intensities, then in my opinion, it's important to train to failure in order to attain maximal muscle tension, which is always a goal with training. So to me, B and C series, I will train to failure. C series, to be honest though, it depends on what type of exercises. If you're doing like rotator cuff or scapular retraction type exercises, I might not train to failure necessarily, because the technical aspect of training these movements is so high and you're isolating such small muscles that I find it a little bit risky on a technique perspective if you're really trying to push to failure. But if you're doing like more simple exercise like elbow flexion or elbow extension or leg machines or lateral raise or something like that, then training to failure has a lot of benefits. Now, another situation in which training to failure is useful is within hypertrophy specific training blocks. So when you're truly focusing on pure development of hypertrophy, then I believe that training to failure has a little bit more benefit to long-term success with hypertrophy. But that being said, you have to understand that purely dedicated hypertrophy blocks should not necessarily be done forever. I don't think that training for a year straight to failure would be necessarily a wise thing for long-term growth. I still feel it needs to be planned or periodized through the years. But for these blocks where you're truly pushing maximum hypertrophy, you should strive to train to failure. It just leads to more benefits with development of muscle mass. So best approach to train high school athletes. So I'm going to be very general here because we could talk for hours on just that topic. But with high school athletes, for the most part, depending on the frequency you're able to train them, if it's only 2 or 3 times a week, I would definitely go with full body sessions. If you're able to train 4 times a week, then I would split upper and lower. But the goal for me with high school players is to teach the basics. So those classical primary compound movements, teach them well, strive to get them stronger on these lifts, focus on hypertrophy generally speaking at that age. This is definitely the strength quality you want to focus on the most. Hypertrophy will help build a solid foundation for future strength and power development. It will help prepare the connective tissue, the tendons, the ligaments for the heavier work that will be coming in the future years. So to me, doing so like yields a lot of long-term benefits with training. So what is my first introduction to training to athletes who've had a longer break after an injury? So for me, it would be basically a structural balance type training session. And what that means is the training program will be very unilateral dominant, a lot of dumbbell work, a lot of pulley work. So for lower body, we're talking about step-up variations, split squat variations. For upper body, we're talking about like one arm rowing variations, even one arm bicep, tricep work, shoulder work, like one arm overhead press. So like be very conscientious of selecting unilateral exercise to try to balance left to right to increase neural drive to the working muscle. The average intensity will be on the lower end, so in the hypertrophy spectrum in terms of strength quality. Frequency, 3-4 times a week. So this would be my typical introductory phase with these clients. What are my thoughts on using gymnastics rings for dips and chins? I think it's great. I think it's a cool tool. It increases the level of difficulty. Requires a lot of recruitment of stabilizer muscles, which is always good for overall performance, so I'm definitely not against. So my cue here would be make sure you build a solid base with standard grips. Once you have that, if you want to increase the involvement or the level of difficulty of these movements, go ahead, use gymnastic rings. It's great for that. So I see absolutely zero objections to it, especially in the accumulation phases where you can focus on building a little bit more reps with your own body weight as you're stabilizing. So you could alternate accumulation phases with the rings, and then the intensification phases when the goal really becomes loading, then you go to a standard grip. So you can just slow to a greater extent, and then you could alternate like this from phase to phase if you wanted to. So I love those gymnastic rings. So body composition training differences between men above or below 10% and female above or below 15%. So this is a little tricky. Those are kind of like random threshold, if you want, in terms of body fat. To me, it always depends on what modality you've used to calculate that body fat percentage, how the athletes look, how the athletes feels, and what are the need of the athletes depending on the sports and on and on. But generally speaking, if you're a male and you're 10% body fat, or if you're a female and you're 15-16% body fat, and you want to get leaner, so let's say for a physique show, I much rather stick to standard strength training protocols where we're focusing on maintaining strength and mass through lifting heavy loads. Don't go too fancy with crazy methods, and then you let the nutrition do its work in terms of fat loss. On the flip side, if you're above, and I'm not talking about 10.8% or whatever, but if you're like 18-20% for a guy, 25-30% for a woman, then I believe that a full body session with higher reps, shorter rest periods, so we're driving a lot of volume and density within these full body sessions, I think will be more beneficial to get you to a body fat percentage closer to that 10-12 for men, 15-17 for female, than to just focus on the nutritional aspect. I think it's kind of like you have to look at it as a scale. You're scaling it down to that point. So at first you eat well, obviously, but you focus on the training to do its job. And as you're progressing and you're getting leaner and leaner and leaner, then at that point you have no choice but to let the nutrition be a little bit more aggressive to get beyond that percentage point. So that to me is the clear difference between these two characteristics of body fat percentage and how you're going to approach the training for fat loss. When training for step up efficiency, what is your preferred progression? So the progression I like for step ups, it's very linear. So like if you, and I'm talking here, I'm not talking about training an elite athlete, but if you have a somewhat of an entry level trainee and you want to improve the step up, or you want them to get good at step ups, so this is the progression I would do. So you would start first, and by the way, you would keep each exercise for the duration of a phase, so a mesocycle. So you would start with the heel elevated step up. So this is also known as the Poliquin step up, where the slant board will be on a platform that's either 2 inches, 4 inches, maximum 6 inches in height. You simply progress the height at first, and then you start loading, but 6 inches will be the maximum height. And the slant board, it should be about 40 to 45 degrees, so very, very steep in angle. And so as you can see, the range of motion is very short, so you're mostly overloading the end range of the knee extension, but it's a good way to start. Your progression, the heel is elevated, but it's stable on the platform. So it kind of like allows you to not focus too much on stabilizing. Then the next progression of this would be the Peterson step up, where the height is the same, 2, 4, or 6 inches. But now instead of having a slant board elevating your heel, you have to raise your heel by yourself and stabilize your heel by yourself to its maximum plantar flexion. So the problem with that, as great as it is hard to do because it requires a lot of balance and stability, which is why it's not a bad thing to start first with the heel elevated step up, so you can have kind of a sense of what you're looking for, but then the Peterson is a progression from it. So it's a little bit more complex. Then you can progress to a side step up with a low elevation. So here you have to make sure that let's say your right foot is on the platform, the left foot, which is the support foot, should be in line with the working foot. So both toes and both heel should be in line. If your support foot is behind, then it's not a side step up anymore. It becomes a front step up. So from that, you can progress to a low box front step up. And by low box, we're talking mid shin here. Then you progress to a side step up to its maximum elevation, and the maximum elevation of a side step up will be reflected by the ankle mobility that you have on that working foot. So once that working foot is on the box, you want to go to the maximum height where the heel can still stay on the box while the support foot is in line with the working foot. If you go too high and your heel has to come off, then it means you don't have the ankle mobility for that height, so don't go there. Then you progress to a front step up, a classic front step up. The height you want to ultimately reach is where the femur is parallel to the ground when the working foot is on the box. From there, you can progress to a lunge step up combo. Now you're lunging onto a box and then you're doing a step up. So it's a combination of both a lunge and a step up together. Then you can progress to a Russian step up, which is a front step up with a very big dynamic component to it. So you're exploding off of the box. And then finally you have a triple jumper step up, which is a step up where the working foot is super high to a point where the back foot, you're basically on your toes, and the front foot, the working leg, the hamstring is covering the calf as you start the movement. So this is very challenging. So this is the progression you should take over time. And not only this, but you can also progress from dumbbells to barbells as well.